The frame opens on a residential street after dark. No traffic, no movement. Porch lights glow faintly, but nothing feels active. Then something enters the center of the image that doesn't belong there. A toddler. Small. Alone. Wearing pale pajamas. One hand clutches a stuffed bear that drags behind them, scraping lightly across the road as they wander into the lane. No adult in sight. No open door nearby. No sign anyone is watching this child, except the camera. The toddler stops, turns slightly, takes a few more steps forward, still alone. This isn't a busy road. Cars don't usually pass through at this hour, which makes the next moment feel even more wrong. Headlights appear at the edge of the frame. They slow. A vehicle eases forward, cautious, unsure. The brake lights glow red against the pavement. From this distance, it looks like a simple decision, the kind people make without thinking. The kind that happens every day in neighborhoods just like this one. But something about the stillness doesn't feel accidental. The timing is too perfect. The street is too quiet. The camera's view feels like it's waiting for something to happen. And that's when movement appears at the edges of the frame. Not running, not rushing, just stepping forward from places the camera can't fully see. Before we go any further, if you're watching right now, take a moment to subscribe to True Crime Stories Chronicles and tell us where you're watching from around the world, because this happened on a street that looks like any other. The vehicle stops completely. A door opens. Someone steps out and turns toward the child. The camera captures her stepping out, and she will never step back in. Marissa Clay enters this story only after everything has already gone wrong. Not as a headline, not as a victim, but as a person whose life, up until that night, followed a steady and familiar rhythm. She was 30 years old and worked as a pharmacy technician at a small family-run pharmacy in Greenwood, the kind of place where regulars weren't just customers, but faces she recognized, people she helped week after week. Co-workers described her as dependable to a fault. If someone needed an extra shift covered, Marissa usually said yes. If an elderly customer struggled at the counter, she stayed a little longer. Not because it was expected, but because that was how she moved through the world. Her life outside of work was quiet. She lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. No ongoing disputes, no unstable relationships, no threats. She wasn't in the middle of a breakup, wasn't arguing with anyone, wasn't worried about her safety. Most evenings were simple. Errands, dinner, checking in with family, then winding down. Friends say she liked calm, predictability. That day unfolded exactly like dozens before it. She completed her shift, helped restock shelves, clocked out on time. On her way home, she stopped at a grocery store for a few basic items, nothing unusual, nothing rushed. Cameras captured her walking in, paying, leaving. She wasn't being followed. No one approached her. She drove home, put the groceries away, straightened up, and realized she'd forgotten a few things. So she went back out. A quick stop at a nearby convenience store, in and out. Snacks, tissue, a short wait at the register. Again, no signs of trouble, no tension, no hesitation. Her movements showed someone who felt safe doing what she'd done countless times before. One thing about Marissa stood out to everyone who knew her. She didn't ignore people who needed help. If someone looked lost, she asked. If something felt off, she paid attention. That instinct wasn't dramatic or reckless. It was ordinary kindness, practiced so often, it became automatic. That night, her mother expected a message. Marissa usually sent one when she got home for good, just a quick check-in. Earlier, she'd mentioned stopping by later in the week. Nothing urgent. Just plans made with the assumption there would be time. As the evening passed, that message never came. Phones stayed unanswered. Hours stretched quietly. At that point, there was still no reason to panic, just a growing sense that something was missing from the routine. Nothing about this day suggested danger. Nothing about it pointed toward violence. Nothing about it was supposed to end on camera. West Beechwood Street doesn't announce itself as a place where anything unusual happens. It's a short residential stretch in Greenwood, where most nights pass the same way. A few porch lights left on, cars parked close to the curb, houses set back just far enough to create pockets the streetlight doesn't fully reach. After dark, it settles into a quiet pattern that rarely draws attention. That quiet is what made it useful. At night, traffic thins out. Drivers who do pass through, usually belong there. People heading home, people who know the turns without thinking. There's no steady flow of cars, no noise to pull eyes toward the road. If something happens quickly, it's easy to miss. If something looks ordinary, it blends in. The homes along the street weren't packed tightly together, but they weren't wide open either. Parked vehicles broke up sightlines. Bushes and corners created spaces where someone could stand without being obvious. From most angles, you could see part of the street, but never all of it at once. One house, sitting at just the right corner, had a doorbell camera facing the road. It captured enough to show what happened, but not enough to explain everything. The camera couldn't see behind the parked cars. It couldn't see into the darker patches near the shrubs. It couldn't hear what was said or what wasn't. It offered a narrow window, and what fell outside that window mattered just as much. This wasn't a street people feared. It wasn't known for crime. It wasn't somewhere residents warned each other about. Familiar streets create a kind of comfort. When nothing ever happens, people stop expecting something will. A child in trouble doesn't look like a threat. A stopped car doesn't raise alarms. Routine lowers defenses. That false sense of safety is powerful. It makes people trust what they're seeing instead of questioning why they're seeing it. Investigators later learned this street wasn't chosen by chance. It met specific conditions: low traffic, limited visibility from most houses, and just enough cover to allow movement without drawing attention. The setup relied on timing and stillness, on things looking normal long enough for someone to stop. The camera that night didn't capture a busy scene. It captured quiet, a pause, a stretch of time where nothing appeared wrong, until it was. And that's the detail that matters most. Because Marissa wasn't the first car to pass through that night. The toddler didn't wander into West Beechwood Street by accident. That detail matters, because everything that followed depends on it. Investigators would later confirm the child belonged to a woman traveling with the group. She wasn't nearby because she lived on that street. She was there because the child served a purpose. Small, unthreatening, impossible to ignore. A sight that triggers instinct before caution has time to catch up. Using a child wasn't random. It wasn't improvisation. It was a method the group had used before while moving between towns. Late at night, quiet streets, a child placed where someone would feel compelled to stop. The goal wasn't speed, it was patience. They didn't need every car to stop. They only needed one. On other nights, in other neighborhoods, drivers hesitated. Some slowed, looked, then kept moving. Others circled once and left. When that happened, the group didn't rush. They didn't chase. They simply gathered the child back up, drove on, and tried again somewhere else. The plan didn't collapse if it failed once. It just waited. That night in Greenwood, the setup was already in place before Marissa ever turned onto the street. The vehicle carrying the group entered the neighborhood earlier and moved through it slowly, not searching for houses, not watching doors, watching traffic patterns. They looped once, then again, positioning themselves ahead of approaching cars. When they saw a lone driver coming from a direction that gave them time, they moved. The child was placed in the roadway deliberately, not rushed, not crying, not drawing attention too quickly, just visible enough, vulnerable enough, the kind of sight that asks a silent question. What if no one helps? As the toddler drifted closer to the center of the street, the group took their places. One figure slipped behind a parked sedan, using its shadow to break his outline. Another stayed near the curb, blending into the darkness along the sidewalk. A third positioned himself closer to the corner, watching the approach. They weren't clustered together. They weren't obvious. From any single angle, nothing looked wrong. The woman with the child stayed near the vehicle, close enough to move quickly, far enough to avoid drawing attention. Her role was simple. Retrieve the toddler once someone stopped. Keep the child quiet. Remove the distraction. Everything depended on timing. When headlights appeared in the distance, no one moved. They waited. The car slowed. Still no movement. The brake lights came on. That pause told them everything they needed to know. The child stood alone in the lane, exactly where the driver could see them clearly. From the perspective of the car, it looked like a situation unfolding in real time. A problem that needed an immediate response. From the perspective of the people waiting, it was confirmation. They weren't watching the child. They were watching the headlights. As Marissa's vehicle rolled onto West Beechwood Street, nothing demanded urgency at first. The road looked the way it always did. Dim, still, familiar. But then she saw the child. She slowed instinctively, easing her foot off the accelerator. The headlights washed over a small figure standing where no child should be. Pajamas, bare feet close to the pavement. A stuffed bear trailing behind. Marissa didn't stop right away. She looked past the child, scanning the street ahead. Then she checked the sidewalks, porches, driveways. She was searching for an adult, for anyone who explained why a toddler was alone in the road at night. There was no one. Her car came to a full stop. The engine stayed running. Inside the vehicle, her purse rested on the seat. Her phone was there too. She didn't pick it up. She didn't call out from the window. She didn't reverse and drive away. From where she sat, the situation didn't look dangerous. It looked unfinished, like a problem that only needed one person to step in. She opened the door and stepped out. The camera shows her moving slowly, not rushing, not panicked. Her shoulders are relaxed, her hands are visible. She angles her body toward the child while still keeping distance, the way someone does when they're trying not to startle a toddler. She leans forward slightly, as if ready to kneel, still glancing around as she approaches. Her posture tells the story better than words ever could. This is someone focused on the child, not the street behind her. Someone who believes the risk is small and temporary. Someone who thinks help is a few steps away. Helping felt safer than driving past. She takes another step. The stuffed bear drags along the pavement as the child shifts their weight. For a moment, everything in the frame looks suspended. Car door open, engine humming, street silent. Then something changes. Her shoulders stiffen. Her head turns sharply, not toward the child but to the side. One foot moves back just slightly, as if her body has registered something her mind hasn't fully caught up to yet. The camera doesn't capture sound, but it captures that instant. The exact second when instinct replaces intention. That's when the frame begins to shift. What happens next unfolds faster than the mind can process. From behind a parked sedan, a man steps into view. Not running, just moving with purpose. Almost at the same time, another figure appears from the opposite side of the street, closing distance from an angle the camera barely catches. A third moves in from behind Marissa's vehicle, cutting off the path back to the open door. It takes seconds. Marissa's body reacts before any clear plan forms. Her shoulders pull back. Her weight shifts away from the child. One hand lifts slightly, not in defense yet, more like reflex, like she's about to ask a question she already knows the answer to. She turns toward her SUV. She doesn't make it. One man reaches for her arm. She pulls back instinctively, twisting away. Another steps into her path, blocking the space between her and the driver's seat. The third closes in from behind, reducing the distance to nothing. The camera captures her head snapping from side to side, trying to understand where to move, where there's space. There isn't any. At the exact same moment the men surround her, the toddler is removed from the street. An adult enters the frame briefly, lifting the child with practiced speed and carrying them away from the center of the road. The distraction disappears as quickly as it appeared. What's left is Marissa, alone, boxed in. The struggle is short but unmistakable. Her arms come up. Her body leans away from the men, feet scrambling for traction. She tries to pull free, but every direction leads into another person. One grip tightens. Another shove redirects her toward the narrow gap between houses. The camera's wide angle shows movement, but not detail. It can't capture expressions. It can't show fear in her eyes. It only shows the sudden loss of control, the moment her choices are stripped away. A car door opens off frame. She's forced forward. Her feet leave the pavement briefly as she's pushed toward the vehicle. The struggle disappears into the dark space between the houses, just beyond the camera's reach. Seconds later, the sedan pulls away, lights still off, moving smoothly as if nothing unusual just happened. Marissa's SUV remains behind. The driver's door is still open. The interior light glows against the concrete. The engine continues running, unattended. It's a silent detail that lingers longer than the struggle itself. From the camera's perspective, the street empties again. The child is gone. The men are gone. The sedan fades out of view. What remains looks almost normal. Too normal for what just occurred. This is where the footage ends. If this moment made your stomach drop, tap like. Not for the algorithm, but so more people actually see what this looked like. Because the camera only shows the beginning. It doesn't show what happens once the car turns the corner. It doesn't show where she's taken. It doesn't show what decisions are made next. What happens next doesn't appear on camera. Once the sedan pulled away from West Beechwood Street, the quiet returned almost instantly. The camera stayed fixed on the empty road, unaware of what was happening just beyond its reach. Inside the moving car, Marissa was forced into the back seat. Her hands were restrained quickly, tightened enough to limit movement, but not enough to draw attention if the car was seen from outside. She was pushed down, her head kept low. The ride away from the neighborhood was short, but long enough for the reality of the situation to settle in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't someone trying to scare her. This wasn't a robbery. Her belongings were still in her SUV. Her purse, her phone, nothing had been taken from her when she was grabbed. The men weren't asking for money. They weren't giving instructions that ended with her being released. As the car moved farther from the street, she knew, fear shifted into something sharper. She spoke. At first, her voice carried urgency, asking where they were taking her, telling them they had the wrong person. When that didn't slow anything down, her words changed. She mentioned her family, her mother. She said people would notice she was gone, that someone would be looking for her. The men argued quietly at first, then more openly. Their voices rose and fell as the car traveled toward the edge of town. One insisted they needed to let her go. Another kept repeating that she had seen too much, that she could identify them. That was when the tension changed. Marissa tried to reason with them. She promised she wouldn't report anything. She said she wouldn't go to police. She told them she just wanted to go home. Her voice carried the weight of someone grasping for the one thing still within reach. The chance that one person in that car might hesitate. They arrived at a vacant rental house on the outskirts of town, a place the group had been using temporarily. She was pulled from the vehicle and taken inside. The space was empty, stripped of comfort, offering no signs of life beyond what they brought with them. Inside, the argument continued. The fear that had driven the abduction now turned inward. One man paced, another stood near the door. The concern wasn't about what they'd done, it was about what might happen if she lived. The possibility that she recognized one of them from an earlier encounter near her workplace hung heavily in the room. Marissa continued to plead. Her voice stayed steady longer than most could manage under that pressure. She repeated that she wouldn't tell anyone, that she would disappear quietly back into her life if they let her leave. For a moment, it wasn't clear what decision would be made. Then the argument escalated. Anger replaced hesitation. Fear hardened into resolve. One blow knocked her off balance. Another followed. She fell to the floor, stunned, trying to recover as the situation spiraled beyond control. And then one decision sealed everything. The shift didn't happen all at once. It happened in fragments. A look held for a second too long. A name almost spoken. A memory surfacing where it shouldn't. Inside the house, one thought began to override all others. She might know who we are. Marissa had seen their faces in the open street. She had been close enough to recognize features. One of the men believed she had seen him before, near an ATM close to her workplace. That idea took hold and refused to let go. It didn't matter whether the memory was clear or not. The fear was enough. The room went quiet. No shouting, no chaos. Just tension tightening as the argument narrowed into a single point. What started as a plan to grab someone and move on was no longer contained. The problem wasn't the kidnapping anymore. It was what came after. Marissa sensed the change. Her voice softened. She repeated herself, slower this time. She said she wouldn't identify anyone. She said she wouldn't speak. She said she just wanted to leave and forget this ever happened. There was no answer. One man stepped closer. Another didn't intervene. The hesitation that existed minutes earlier drained away. Fear took its place. Not fear of her, but fear of consequences. Fear of being recognized. Fear of prison. Fear of losing control of what had already gone too far. The first strike came without warning. She fell hard, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. Before she could recover, it continued. Not loud. Not frantic. Direct. Each movement driven by the same thought. End the risk. This wasn't an explosion of anger. It was a decision made under pressure. When she stopped moving, the room fell into silence again, the kind that follows something irreversible. No one spoke, no one rushed to help. The realization settled slowly, heavily. The kidnapping had been planned. What followed had not. But once the line was crossed, there was no turning back. What mattered now was concealment. The problem had changed shape, and so had their response. They moved her body into the crawlspace beneath the house, covering the opening with loose boards and debris. The space swallowed what remained of her, hidden from view, hidden from the street, hidden from the life she had stepped out of hours earlier. Outside, the night continued uninterrupted. Inside, the consequences had already begun. Morning arrived without any sign of what had happened hours earlier. Greenwood woke up the way it always did. Traffic picked up, stores opened, phones buzzed. On the surface, the night had left no trace. At the pharmacy, Marissa's absence was noticed almost immediately. She was reliable in a way people come to depend on without realizing it. If she was running late, she called. If she couldn't make a shift, she said so. That morning, there was no call, no message. Her station stayed empty. Coworkers tried her phone, it rang, then went to voicemail. They tried again, same result. By mid-morning, concern began to replace confusion. This wasn't like her. Not even close. Across town, her mother felt the same unease. Marissa usually sent a quick message once she was done for the night. Nothing long, just enough to say she was home. That message never came. At first, it was easy to explain away. Maybe she fell asleep, maybe her phone died. But as the hours passed, those explanations felt thinner. Her mother drove to Marissa's apartment. The parking lot was quiet. Marissa's vehicle wasn't there. She knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Still nothing. The blinds were drawn. The lights inside were off. It looked untouched, as if no one had returned after leaving the night before. She waited. Called again. Left messages that went unanswered. By early afternoon, the worry could no longer be ignored. Marissa didn't disappear without telling someone. She didn't vanish from routines she'd kept for years. Her mother drove the routes Marissa usually took, checking streets, scanning parking lots, hoping to spot the equinox. She didn't. Eventually, she did the one thing that made the fear real. She went to police and filed a missing person report. Officers began with the basics: last known movements, places she frequented, people she spoke to regularly. Nothing stood out as suspicious yet. No history that pointed to danger. No reason to believe she'd leave on her own. Then a neighbor on West Beechwood Street mentioned something unusual. An SUV had been sitting a few houses down since the night before. Officers went to check. The vehicle was locked. The driver's door was closed now. Inside, Marissa's purse sat where it had been left. Her phone rested on the seat. Nothing appeared disturbed. It was as if she had stepped out for only a moment and never returned. In that instant, the case changed. What had been a search for someone missing became a search for someone taken. The calm of the morning gave way to the weight of what the night had left behind. The officers didn't arrive on West Beechwood Street expecting answers. At first, it was just another stop. A parked vehicle, a missing person, a routine check that might or might not lead anywhere. The street looked harmless in daylight, quiet, ordinary. Nothing about it suggested what had unfolded there hours earlier. Then a homeowner across the street mentioned a doorbell camera. The footage was pulled up on a laptop right there on the scene. At first it didn't seem urgent, a still street, dim lighting, nothing happening. The officers watched, waiting for something that explained why Marissa's SUV had been left behind. And then the toddler appeared. That single detail changed the way everyone in the room leaned forward. A child alone in the road, no adult nearby, no explanation. Officers watched as the toddler wandered, then paused, then wandered again. They saw Marissa's vehicle approach, slow, and stop. They saw her step out. What followed removed all doubt. Figures emerged from different sides of the frame. Not together, not rushed, coordinated. Marissa was surrounded within seconds. The footage showed her pulled away from her vehicle, forced out of view. At the same moment, the toddler was lifted and removed from the road. A sedan entered the frame briefly and then disappeared. The officers didn't rewind right away. They sat with it. What they were watching wasn't a chance encounter. It wasn't a spontaneous act. The timing, the placement of the child, the way the adults moved, it all pointed to a planned ambush. The camera had captured enough to make one thing unmistakably clear. Marissa had not walked away on her own. The case shifted instantly. Patrol officers secured the area. Detectives were called in. The footage was copied and sent for enhancement. Every frame was reviewed again, slower this time. They tracked movement, angles, distances, the way each person entered and exited the shot. Other cameras were located nearby. One down the street caught a blurred image of the sedan leaving the area. A corner store camera picked it up minutes later on a main road. Each clip added a piece, not repeating what they already knew, but extending the picture outward. The toddler detail became central. Officers recognized it for what it was: a deliberate distraction, a tool meant to override caution. Once that clicked, the rest of the setup made sense. The waiting, the patience, the way the men didn't rush until the moment Marissa stepped out. As the timeline came together, another detail surfaced: an ATM transaction later that night using Marissa's card. The still image captured, there was clear enough to show a face leaning forward toward the machine. That image was circulated immediately. Within hours, officers across departments recognized him. One image would identify them all. And from that moment on, the search was no longer blind. Once the ATM image was circulated, the momentum of the case changed permanently. The still showed a man leaning toward the machine, face clearly visible as he entered a PIN number. It wasn't grainy. It wasn't partial. Officers recognized him almost immediately. His name surfaced within hours, along with a history that explained why he was already familiar to law enforcement. From there, attention turned to the people he was known to move with. The faces in the footage from West Beechwood Street were compared again. Builds, movements, clothing. Two other men matched individuals already on record for robbery-related offenses and vehicle theft. The woman seen removing the toddler was identified next. Records tied her to repeated welfare checks involving the child. The picture sharpened quickly. By the second day, investigators had likely locations. Traffic footage showed the sedan moving toward a cluster of older rental homes on the edge of town. Neighbors reported unfamiliar people coming and going at odd hours. The pattern fit. Two teams moved in early. At a relative's home, officers located the toddler unharmed. The woman was taken into custody on the spot. Her initial explanation didn't match the footage. The timeline didn't hold. At the rental property, officers observed one of the men loading bags into a vehicle. When they approached, he ran. The chase was brief. He was caught and taken into custody without further incident. Inside the house, the remaining two men were found asleep in separate rooms. They were detained without resistance. The house itself felt temporary. Sparse furniture, personal items scattered. Nothing about it suggested anyone planned to stay long. During the search, officers noticed an area of the living room floor where the boards didn't sit flush. Dirt lined the edges. When they lifted the boards and shined a light downward, the crawl space became visible. Marissa was there. Her body had been placed beneath the house and partially covered. The discovery confirmed what investigators already suspected but hoped wasn't true. The case shifted from abduction to homicide. The evidence followed quickly and cleanly. Zip ties found near Marissa's abandoned vehicle matched those inside the house. Fibers from her work clothes were recovered from the living room floor. Soil from the crawl space matched what was found on the shoes of the man arrested outside. The ATM transaction tied him to her card shortly after the killing. Fingerprints confirmed it. Nothing about the sequence required speculation. The pieces fit without forcing them together. Interviews came next. At first, denial, then distancing. Each person tried to reduce their role, shifting blame toward someone else. But the footage, the physical evidence, and the timeline closed those gaps one by one. By the end of the day, there was no confusion about who had been involved or how it ended. The process wasn't dramatic, it was methodical, and it was unavoidable. Once all four were in custody, the story they tried to tell began to fracture. At first, the men spoke in fragments. Each minimized their involvement. Each insisted they were present, but not responsible. One claimed he never touched Marissa. Another said he didn't know how things went so wrong. They pointed to each other, circling the same excuses, hoping the gaps between their statements would create doubt. They didn't. Investigators laid out the timeline slowly, piece by piece. The footage from West Beechwood Street, the movement of the sedan, the removal of the toddler, the abandoned SUV, the ATM transaction, the rental house. Each detail landed where it belonged. When one story contradicted another, the evidence didn't bend to accommodate it. The contradictions stacked up quickly. One man claimed Marissa was already unconscious when they arrived at the house. The medical findings said otherwise. Another said the zip ties weren't used until later. The marks on her wrists told a different story. When asked about the crawl space, silence followed. Eventually, the pressure narrowed to one point. After hours of questioning, one of them admitted what the others had been avoiding. The kidnapping had been planned. The toddler had been used deliberately. Marissa had been alive when they brought her to the house. She had begged to be released. She had promised not to say anything. The admissions stripped away what little distance remained. The man at the center of it all finally spoke. He acknowledged striking her during an argument. He admitted to strangling her, not because of anger, but because he believed she could identify him. He described fear taking over, fear of recognition, fear of consequences. He confirmed what the evidence already showed. The others didn't stop him. No one intervened. No one called for help. Once she was dead, the focus shifted to hiding what they had done. Moving her body, covering the opening, wiping surfaces, burning fragments of her belongings, using her card, leaving town. Each step was a reaction to the one before it. When the statements were complete, there were no unanswered questions left about how the night unfolded. The camera hadn't captured the final moments inside that house. It hadn't shown the argument or the violence or the crawl space, but it had shown the decision that made everything else possible. The camera didn't show how she died, but it showed why. What makes this case difficult to sit with isn't just the violence, it's the reason Marissa stopped in the first place. She didn't intervene because she was careless. She didn't act out of curiosity or thrill. She stopped because a child alone in the road triggers something deep and immediate in most people. The instinct to protect, to fix what's clearly wrong. That instinct is learned early and reinforced constantly. We praise it, we teach it, we depend on it to keep communities functioning, and that's exactly why it worked. The setup relied on empathy doing what empathy always does, overriding hesitation. A toddler doesn't look like a threat. A small body in danger feels urgent. The mind moves faster than risk assessment because the situation seems simple. Help the child, find an adult, solve the problem. What happened to Marissa exposes a hard truth. Kindness can be turned against the person offering it. Vulnerability can be used as leverage. When harm hides behind something that looks helpless, the usual rules stop working. This doesn't mean people should stop caring. It means the world sometimes punishes the very traits we value most, and the burden of navigating that danger is unfairly placed on those who never asked for it. Marissa didn't create the risk that took her life. She encountered it. The responsibility belongs entirely to the people who chose to use a child as a tool, to the ones who saw compassion as an opening instead of a boundary. They relied on someone doing the decent thing. They counted on it. That's what makes this case resonate far beyond one street in Greenwood. It forces a question no one likes answering. How do you stay human in a world where humanity can be exploited? There's no clean solution. No simple rule that keeps people safe without costing something important. Caution can save lives, but unchecked suspicion can erode the very connections that make communities feel livable. Marissa's story doesn't argue for fear. It argues for awareness, for recognizing that danger doesn't always announce itself with force. Sometimes it waits quietly, wrapped in something that looks like it needs help. This wasn't recklessness. This wasn't poor judgment. This was humanity meeting someone else's willingness to abuse it, and paying a price no one should ever have to pay. Marissa Clay should have gone home that night. She should have closed her car door, driven the rest of the way, and sent the message her mother was waiting for. She should have woken up the next morning and gone to work the way she always did. The things she planned, small, ordinary, unfinished, should have continued without interruption. That's what was taken. Marissa wasn't defined by the moment captured on camera. She was defined by consistency, by showing up, by helping without needing credit, by living a life that didn't draw attention to itself because it didn't need to. She mattered to people who counted on her in ways that don't make headlines. Rides to appointments, covered shifts, quiet check-ins that meant someone else wasn't alone. Her future didn't disappear in one dramatic instant. It was cut off mid-stride, mid-routine, mid-sentence. What followed for her family wasn't closure, it was permanence. A phone that would never light up with her name again. A routine that stayed broken. A space in their lives that couldn't be filled by answers or convictions. Even justice, when it came, didn't return what was lost. It only confirmed that loss was final. The street where it happened went back to normal. Cars passed through again. Porch lights turned on and off, but nothing about that place is neutral anymore for the people who know what unfolded there. Ordinary settings don't erase extraordinary harm. They carry it quietly. Marissa's absence is heavy because it's undeserved, because it was created by choices she didn't make, because her final act was the same thing that defined her life, responding when something looked wrong. She didn't fail to protect herself. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. She was human. And that humanity is what makes this story linger. Not the footage, not the method, not the outcome. The fact that a person doing what felt right paid the highest possible price for it. If this story stayed with you, share it, because attention forces conversations people try to avoid. And tell me, would you have stopped?